Good morning to everybody joining from the United States, and good afternoon to everybody joining from Europe or India. My name is Johannes Urpelainen. I am the founding director of the Initiative for Sustainable Energy Policy and a professor of energy resources and environment at Johns Hopkins University. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our webinar, where we introduce, review, and discuss the findings of our new report on energy access and clean energy in the state of Jharkhand, India. ISEP has been working in the state of Jharkhand now for 3 years. We have been studying the state of energy access, clean energy use, dependence on coal, and the challenge of energy transition in the state, together with many of our supporters and partners. Much of this work is financed and supported by the Oak Foundation. We have some very good partners, local partners. This webinar is organized together with Power for All. We have been working with the Central University of Jharkhand. We have Professor Samdarshi here with us today, and we have had a number of engagements with the Electricity Regulatory Commission. We have Dr. Prasad here with us today. We have been working with different state government departments and agencies, and of course, many civil society groups and the local media. What we're going to do today is we are going to really try to understand what has been the change and progress in the state's energy access and clean energy scenario, with a particular focus on the rural areas. We did an earlier survey on Jharkhand about 2 years ago, where we got a kind of a baseline after Prime Minister Modi's Saubhagya program, Ujjwala program, and all of these kind of energy access programs, along with the push for renewable energy. And now we are going to revisit the state's situation. Of course, one interesting aspect of this second survey is that it happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, which had some impact on livelihoods, supply chains, and household energy access. So this is all something we are going to discuss today, and we are going to try to understand what has happened and what would be the way forward for the state. Today, we are first going to hear from our keynote speaker, who is Dr. Arvind Prasad. He has over 30 years of experience as an IAS officer, working for Government of India and the state government of Bihar. He has served as a senior advisor for power and energy, planning commissions, and joint secretary, and social defense. In addition to other responsibilities, he has served as the chairman of Jharkhand State Electricity Regulatory Commission. He has a BTech in electrical engineering from IIT Kanpur and master's and PhD in management from Yale University here in the United States. He has published extensively, including on policy for structural reforms for India's economic development. So we are first going to hear from Dr. Prasad, who's going to give us some high-level remarks, and then after that we are going to continue with the presentations and panel discussions. Dr. Prasad. Dr. Prasad, you are on mute. If you could unmute yourself. Necessary.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
we can. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Professor Johannes. I see Professor Samdarshi, some other familiar faces like Diksha and many others. It is very good to connect to all of you after such a gap of almost 2 years. And I must commend Professor Johannes and his team that in spite of the entire 2 years, was a very difficult period. In fact, last report was of January 2020. And right after that, the country around the globe, we faced this COVID situation. And in spite of that, you were able to complete this study on time, and we are able to discuss right after 2 years. Now, this study has a very significant importance because it is a time series. We are studying, it is a follow-up study after 2 years. So it tells in some sense what worked among the policies and programs Government of India and state government adopted for energy transition, what have worked and what have not worked so well or as intended. And to that extent, it is very important. Now, very recently, in fact, last month only, Government of India has set up an Energy Transition Advisory Committee under the chairmanship of Tarun Kapoor, who was earlier Joint Secretary in Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and retired as Secretary Petroleum. So in a way, he has the experience of electricity as well as fossil fuel petroleum products. So the study of this kind, which covers both the aspects of so-called just transition, just accessibility, and also the employment for those who are dependent on coal sector. And as country has to phase out, or at least for the time being, phase down the coal sector, this issue of employment or welfare of those who are engaged in coal sector at the moment will remain relevant. And to that extent, it is very important. Only caveat I would put that Professor Johannes has already pointed out that due to this 2 years of COVID period, government institutions and individual families, they all experience very difficult time situation. Like many people lost their jobs, had difficult health condition. Government focus almost shifted from normal administration to managing the COVID situation. There was a lockdown, the maintenance and a grid distribution network must have been affected. So to that extent, we have to take this finding with that little bit caution. But nevertheless, even if the numbers may have some variance if we had done in a normal situation, at least it gives the broad direction of the issues under consideration. And therefore, this issue report is of great value to us, both to the researcher and for the policymakers, because this topic will be here on table for quite some time, and as of a practical value, not just of academic interest. It is very relevant and is doing. There are some very good findings, or very findings which will be of relevance to all of us. Now, the report has very clearly brought out the issue of affordability. Quite often in policy making or in implementation, we feel that sometimes people take a view that since the resources are not available, so if you create a grid infrastructure, people will just use them. Or if you have gas supply, LPG supply, people will use them. But affordability remains a very critical component, and that report has so clearly brought it out. For the international audience, the kind of people we are dealing with, they have 1,000 rupees of income. So that comes about $15 per month. Even if you take PPP, it is $2. So nominal to afford LPG or grid power connection is a challenge. And that report brings out very clearly. Also, with that report, the issue when it comes to light accessibility, lighting, then the report takes grid versus kerosene. I think there is a time now to shift the focus from kerosene versus grid to kerosene versus solar panel, solar housing system. Now, the report itself says that in last 2 years, from 3%, it has increased to 5%, those who are using the solar energy for light. Also, there are 2-3 positive indicators. One, among the kerosene users, 79% of the people found it expensive. Whereas among the solar energy user, only 31 or I think 31% said it is expensive. Similarly, when it comes to question of safety, kerosene user found it, so 55% found it unsafe as against 26% finding it unsafe. So what I'm trying to say, there's already some perceived advantages of using solar for lighting as against using kerosene. So, but the only thing is that there is a potential. We need to have a focus efforts. I find there are 3-4 elements which need to have a focused integrated approach. One, there has been significant improvement in technology, both solar panel and also battery technology. Then there is issue of fabrication, engineering of fabrication. We want to have a very robust, the kind of population we are dealing, it should be just plug and play like refrigerators. So the whole system, including control panel and everything, should be so robust that one just buys it and plugs in, it works. Third is about financial. The model here, when you use grid power, it is a monthly expense. When you buy solar panel or a solar housing system, it is an expense, capital expense. So there has to have some financing mechanism to take care of that. Subsidy mechanism of government policy, grid power for domestic poor people is highly subsidized. But when someone buys the solar panel, there is an element of subsidy, not so much. So there is need to improve that government policy. What I'm trying to say is there are 4 or 5 issues around this. And of course, maintenance and marketing. You need a company which not only supplies, but also maintain and take care, maybe on revenue model of supply. So I think there is a need to have a center, maybe in CUJ or support, I don't know what kind of financing you have, which takes care of all these and try to develop a local fabrication, marketing support system and work with the government which transfer the subsidy, which it does to grid power network, grid connected home work in some form to those who are using solar panel based lighting. But I see great potential because there is a perceived advantages, and fortunately in the report that advantages have been recognized by the survey respondents. So that is a great indication. At some place I saw that during the period, the tribal household reliance on kerosene has increased from 11% to 21%. I think this needs to be a little probed a bit. It could be just temporary phase because of the corona, the grid network and maintenance, and people just trying to be self-reliant rather than depending on other institutions in a difficult situation. But this needs to be probed because otherwise the whole attempt to shift from kerosene to other mode will be hampered. Now, the distribution licensing issues is old one, but it requires very new insight. Because the resources for the distribution licensing and their billing and collection cycle, these two are not different issues. In fact, they are very much related. Unless the distribution companies does the complete billing and cycle, there will always be sort of resources, and that will lead to deterioration of quality of supply and a further reduction in revenue. Now, Jharkhand has 5 distribution licenses. I think there is a need to have some comparative management structure, one of Jharkhand Bijli Vitran Nigam, which is the larger one, and another, if not all other, Tata Power in Jusko, Jamshedpur area. There the loss, maintenance, everything is so 2% loss, complete billing, and naturally the satisfaction level is much higher. Recently, Odisha has given all its distribution licensee to Tata Power. So I think more than other issues, it is administrative issues. And, Professor Johannes, you have that global experience of distribution licenses, so you are in the right position to bring in those administrative issues. Otherwise, if you don't bill, if you don't collect, then no matter what you do, you can never be sustainable and the supply will never be good, and consumer will always be running away from grid supply to kerosene or whatever. Now, firewood, unfortunately, in very poor areas, given that firewood is easily accessible and locally available, even though it is very arduous for the women folk to collect and very hazardous for their health, somehow for the lower income, it will continue to be very attractive because it is locally available, almost free. One needs to give a deep thinking how to motivate users to shift to LPG. Now, as the report brings, there's a keep on changing, sometimes they use it, sometimes it drops to this. Now, issue of alternative employment for those in coal sector is very important, particularly when there is some move towards phasing out or phasing down the coal. However, I feel that given the importance of the subject, this has to have a separate study rather than being part of this study on energy accessibility. Because whereas energy accessibility is relevant for the entire state, entire population, the coal employment, even though it is 14 districts, but if you see area-wise or population dependency, it is not. It may not be more than 20% or 25%. So even if you want to keep as a part 2 of this report, the group which are studied, group which are surveyed, has to have a distinct flavor. Otherwise, you'll be responding on a very small fraction, a very small percentage, in fact, whom you are targeting for energy access will be the coal user or coal employment. But this is important because it captures other aspects of just transition. Therefore, there's a recommendation like using district mineral foundation fund also requires some kind of deeper study before it could be acceptable. District mineral foundation is basically is not a free untied fund. There's a scheme called PMKKY, Prime Minister Khanij Kshetriya Vikas Yojana. And there is a priority. Now, the fund is often used as such other important requirement like drinking water. In mineral areas, groundwaters are often polluted because of mines and minerals. So the supply of water has to come from a distant place, and the fund is often used that. Similarly, due to the dust and pollution, a lot of healthcare issue comes, and this fund is used. Due to movement of heavy trucks, road or transportation. What I'm trying to say that before we can suggest or conclude that DMF can be used for creating alternative employment, one needs to study the working of DMF and fund. So in summary, what I'm trying to suggest that the subject is very important and needs to have important focus. Just one second. But this is a very important topic, and I would like to have a larger study, separate report, but nevertheless. At many places, the report suggests the taking help of civil society organizations. Now, as a concept, it is a very good suggestion, and it comes quite often. However, we quite often find in those areas where the population are marginalized, civil society finding credible and capable civil society organizations is also a challenge. And that developing such organization itself is a important task. In many schemes, there is a guideline to use Panchayati Raj institutions like Gram Sabha. For example, in DMF, District Mineral Fund, also the scheme had to be approved by the Gram Sabha. But whereas this does bring in the common decision-making process, but it has its own challenge in deciding itself. You'll quite often get politicized in taking these schemes. So it is always good to have in institutions other than the government implementing agencies. But the challenges remain there also. However, I must say that the report has brought out many issues, highlighted the progress made over 2 years. And in that sense, it's a very unique study that you created a baseline and then very precisely saw the impact of Prime Minister Ujjwala scheme, Saubhagya scheme, implementation of solar energy. So to that extent, continuing with this study has a very useful value, because we rarely find sometimes that where you have a study over a period and on the topics which are of immediate relevance, where the government or any agency cannot postpone the decisions. They have to decide and move ahead. So I congratulate all of you and thank you for bringing out this report and sticking to the timeline. And I will end with this comment right now, and we'll add if I have any new points during the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Prasad. Those were some, I think, very valuable insights into our studies, some really thoughtful ideas for things that we can discuss here, ways forward in the different areas that we included in the study. Now, with those remarks, I think we can now move forward with the program. Thank you, Dr. Prasad, again for taking the time and giving us your response and commentary on the report. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly frame the conversation by giving an overview of some of the work that ISEP is doing in Jharkhand, and then after that I will invite the lead authors of the report to present it, and after that we will move on to the discussion. So as Dr. Prasad mentioned in his remarks, we at ISEP we do have multiple areas of interest in the state of Jharkhand. One of them is certainly energy access. We have been following closely both the extension of the grid and the use of alternative distributed energy, so solar home systems, microgrids in Jharkhand. That's an area that we continue to follow. And of course, one particular area of interest for us has been the status of energy access among tribal communities, which are a very significant part of the Jharkhand population and have historically kind of been behind the rest of the population. Another area of great interest for us has been clean cooking fuels. So throughout the pandemic, we have followed the clean cooking fuel access through the sort of repeated telephone surveys, where we briefly interview a sample of 600 households across Jharkhand on their clean cooking fuel practices and uses. And one of the key patterns that emerges from that is exactly the kind of thin line between clean, modern cooking fuel access and traditional biomass. The same household in 1 week can spend mostly use biomass, and in another week mostly use LPG for their needs. And this varies depending on income, liquidity, access to LPG, the season. If it's the monsoon season, then firewood is difficult to collect. In the dry season, it's easier. It's a bit colder, you need more firewood. And sort of all this variation is something that we need to understand. A third area of significant interest has been this challenge of transition. So really trying to understand what are the difficulties of moving away from a coal-based economy. In Jharkhand, both the direct mineral extraction, but also the industries built around it are very significant part of gross domestic product, tax revenue, and livelihoods. So we have been looking at possible ways to move away and reduce the dependence in this area. And one of the areas that we are currently studying is actually the district mineral foundation and its possible role. And here we are happy to draw on some really interesting work done by one of our partners, the Swanity Initiative, which worked extensively on the use of the DMF during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are building on a very strong foundation there. And we expect to continue on all these lines. To me, it seems that the most significant area moving forward for the state of Jharkhand is going to be this transition, because the scenario for coal demand is changing. On the one hand, we do have in India still the kind of a push for domestic coal mining. That's something that's been a priority for the government for some time now. But at the same time, we also have the growing competitiveness of renewable energy, battery storage, hydrogen, and all these alternatives that will begin to displace coal as we move forward. So I think there is a clear need in the next 5 to 10 years to find kind of alternative strategies, both at the micro level for households, but also at the macro level in terms of industrial and commercial strategy. So these are all going to be areas that we will study as we move forward. Now, with that, I put in the chat some links. You can take a look at our website, and I put also the link to the report. So please take a look at those materials when you have time, and reach out to us at any given time if you are interested in working with us in the state of Jharkhand or in other states in India that face similar challenges. I do see here, for example, Charudatta, another great collaborator of ours from FIDR, is noting that there is a similar study ongoing in the state of Odisha. So these kind of comparative learning opportunities, I think, are going to be very valuable for the state government, civil society, and academia in India. Now, with that, I would next like to invite the report lead authors. We have Diksha Bijlani and Dr. Michael Acklin, who are going to be presenting. So I'll introduce them in turn, beginning with Diksha. Diksha Bijlani is a public policy graduate from Harvard Kennedy School, born and raised in India, and currently works in local stakeholder engagements at one of the biggest climate funds in the world, Climate Investment Funds, or CIF, within the World Bank. Her work primarily focuses on climate justice and global inequality, and she has a keen interest and training in behavioral science and behavioral change communication. So thank you, Diksha, for joining us and for leading the writing of the report at ISEP. It's always a wonderful experience working with you. Dr. Michael Acklin is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Pittsburgh and also affiliated to Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs and the Global Studies Center. At ISEP, he is the Director of Energy Access and Transition Research. He is the author of 2 books and has published in a number of leading academic journals. He studies how policies can address the grand challenges of our time and why they sometimes fail to do so. He is looking for solutions to problems from climate change to financial crises around the world. So with those introductions, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about the report. And after that, we will open it for some Q&A from the audience. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Johannes. So I can begin with presenting the findings, and then Michael will take over. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So we'll just be presenting, the summary findings of the report, which will really lay the groundwork for the discussion, and some of which, Johannes and Arvind have already mentioned. But just as a background, as has been mentioned, this was a follow-up. The study basically mentions the progress on indicators which were first measured in the first round in July 2019, and then a follow-up survey was conducted in 2021, and it was a representative sample of 1,500 rural respondents across all districts of Jharkhand, and was supported by the Oak Foundation. The first, theme is access to electricity, on which the first finding is that there has been very slow improvement in electrification rates, where we define electrification as access to electricity, whether from the grid or solar home system, diesel generator or microgrid, which has really slightly increased, but not really at statistically significant levels. But the access to grid still remains low. So if you look at these two graphs, one of which is access to grid and the other is access to electricity, access to grid really still remains low. And particularly if you look at Palamu and Garhwa, even Gomla and Latehar districts, access to grid is still much lower than and especially in some districts, particularly than overall access to electricity. The second is that, as Arvind also mentioned, among tribal households, we've seen actually a decline in grid use, perhaps which is a temporary thing because of the pandemic, but there has been an increase in reliance on kerosene. And, even amongst the tribal households which are electrified and have grid access, those which, use the grid as their primary source of lighting also went down, and the reliance on kerosene increased. And if you see this graph, which is, sort of by caste, scheduled tribes, which per the latest census, which was conducted in 2011, make up more than a quarter of Jharkhand's population, and yet they are the ones with, the lowest access to electricity overall. And again, this again is a similar story if you see access to electricity and access to the grid, which again is lower, and as the trend is, it's lowest for tribal households. And then if you study this by district, again, Garhwa comes down at the bottom, with the lowest sort of access, and also even Hazaribagh and Pakur have low access to the grid for tribal households. There are some districts that do well on this, but overall, the most important takeaway is that this access to grid is lowest for tribal households. Then if you see the overall sample, then the use of grid as the primary source of lighting has improved, which is good news. And kerosene reliance has reduced, and the most important part of which is the last statement here, which is that of all the households that do use kerosene as their primary source of lighting, those who have access to a grid really went down from 50% to 29%, which means that fewer households that have access to the grid now rely on kerosene for lighting, which really, is good news that they are using the grid, and the use of grid as primary source of lighting has went up. And again, there are districts that perform lower on this, Garhwa again being sort of at the bottom, Palamu too, Latehar as well. But overall, there's good news that the use of grid as primary source of lighting has improved. Then there has also been improvement in the number of hours per day of electricity supply. But as was discussed briefly before, the improvement in billing is, even though metering has gone up, the improvement in billing and collection of payments, more importantly, hasn't really, improved. And the proportion, the households, 23% of households now got connected in the Saubhagya scheme, which was lower than the first round. And the most important finding here is the last one, which, the proportion of households that have a meter, which receive a bill and make timely payments, is really just the same as the first round, which is at 11%, which is really low. And some of the solutions around resources on discoms was discussed, which we'll get into later. But this is one finding to really keep in mind, that it's just 11% of households really make timely payments, receive a bill, and have a meter. But there has been improvement in the median hours of electricity supplied per day from 9 to 12 hours, which is good news. Then in terms of satisfaction with electricity access, there has been moderate improvement, but the cost and reliability have both become much bigger barriers compared to the first round. So even if you look at the electrified households, in the sample, 68% actually live in, they are connected to sort of, they could get grid access if they wanted to, but they chose not to. And the cost was really connection. The cost of connection was cited as the biggest barrier to not getting the grid, even though you can. And then the monthly cost of the bill, again, was the second biggest barrier to not having a grid, even though you could get the grid. So, this is important to keep in mind when we think about the Saubhagya scheme, which has the goal of universal electricity access, but with cost of connection and cost of bill being the two biggest barriers. And the third, of course, is the reliability, which is the voltage that you can get, the hours of electricity supply, all of those, the quality of supply really it's also a really big barrier. So in terms of satisfaction with electricity access, there's still and the household's willingness to get a grid connection, there's still work to be done. There's some good news on the solar end, that it's gone up slightly, the use of solar home systems and solar lanterns, and even those even the median hours of electricity supplied by solar lanterns have gone up, which is good news, because as Arvind mentioned, we need to think of solar as competing with kerosene, not just the grid, but like solar as an alternative to kerosene while grid access is improved. So in that sense, if you look at the blue in this graph, really in some districts it's much higher, but solar really seems to have improved, and in terms of in its I guess it would also be consumer confidence in solar, but also the availability of good quality solar lanterns in the market, and the cost of them, and perhaps financing to buy them. All of those must have had to work in tandem for this percentage to increase. Then the second theme, which we'll talk about, is access to clean cooking. The first finding really is that, like, in terms of LPG, access to liquefied petroleum gas, it's really been slow improvement. And under the PMUI scheme, which was Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, it was started in 2016. Also, there's really not been too much improvement in terms of access in these past 2 years. And Kunti and Latehar rank the lowest in terms of LPG usage, which is like lower than almost lower than 20%. And there are some districts that do well on this, but overall, there has been really slow improvement in access to LPG. Fuel stacking really means that even when households have LPG, they continue to rely on a combination of sort of LPG and then biomass fuels like firewood, even charcoal, cow dung, all of those. And really, we have seen that there's been no improvement here as per these findings in fuel stacking. So how we measure that is basically households which have LPG access and use LPG as their primary fuel. And this really declined in the study. And those who use firewood as their primary fuel increased, which basically means that even when you have LPG access, you're still using firewood, and you're using it more than you're using LPG, which, this could be because of cost of LPG. Firewood is virtually free, even though you do have to do the labor of bringing it. And there's also, I'm sure, an element of habit there. There's a cultural element there, which could be one of the reasons that, these houses you're used to cooking with firewood, and there's a cost competency to it compared to LPG. So that's really not good news. And in terms of, again, even for tribal households, the access to LPG has been really slow, and even though there has been some improvement in terms of reliance on biomass fuels, it's again very slow, 89% to 85%, which is really not statistically significant levels. And in terms of satisfaction with LPG, it's been low, and cost is by far the biggest barrier of against using LPG. And even the distance to refill your LPG cylinder is a big barrier for households. The distance to supply LPGs, like these, and the monthly expense of refills as well. So again, if you really see, cost is really by far the biggest barrier here in terms of access to energy as well. And the, even though the PMUI scheme was targeted to kind of deal with the barriers related to cost, it still seems that it's one of the biggest and barriers. And the report goes deeper into, what the cost of a cylinder could be, and how much households have to pay for the second refill, even if the first one might be free for some of them. And as Arvind had mentioned, if you have an income of 1,000 per month and you have to spend, 25% of that in LPG, households might be unwilling to do it. And I'll leave this to Michael to present on coal dependence and also the policy implications.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Diksha. So let me conclude by the last two parts of the report. First, I'll briefly talk about coal dependence. As Dr. Prasad said, this would be worth an entire separate seminar or webinar and conversation. I'll just briefly talk about these results, and then I'll turn to some of the policy implications that stem from our report. If we think about coal dependence, there are really kind of two main findings that strike out in this report. And both of them should be read with some degree of caution, as I will explain in 1 second. So first is that the share of employment from the coal industry, if we take Jharkhand as a whole, remains quite small. I believe it's a few percentage points in our report. And that has been the case in both the first wave that we collected, the first data or the first survey we fielded a couple of years ago, and in the present one. And that's true for the general population, for tribal households about equally. That's the first result. The second result is that if you take the whole state, a typical household will generally not perceive coal as being extremely important, whether it's as a source of jobs or as a source of income. Now, this is, of course, a little bit, I wouldn't say misleading, but as Dr. Prasad mentioned, there is a high degree of geographical concentration of the coal sector, right? The coal sector is geographically quite concentrated, so it's not going to be something that has necessarily the same, or we will see the same results if we look across the entire state. This, of course, does not mean that coal is not important, right? I think Dr. Johannes mentioned at the beginning in his introduction that there are other ways in which coal may matter. It may generate local infrastructures. It is important as a source of tax revenues. So coal matters, but its geographical concentration leads to its impact to be quite narrow in that way. And there are yet other ways in which coal could also matter, right? For instance, one possibility is that it induces migration for jobs. And so that would be another channel in which coal becomes or has an importance that goes beyond the numbers that appear in our report. But nevertheless, based on our report, we can evaluate that that the typical household will not perceive coal as being an overly important component of how well it is doing. Let me now just turn to some of the policy implications of the report. And this is going to be based both on our own experience of having worked over the last few years in Jharkhand. It is also based on the conversations we've had over time with organizations such as 180, IFRS, and so forth. Of course, they're not responsible for anything we're going to say right now, but this is kind of pulls together our experience of working in the state over the last few years. Let's start with electricity access, right? And so some of the findings from the report show that the access level nominally is quite high. Quality of supply could still be improved, and affordability remains also something that is a challenge for households. Affordability, of course, is a theme that runs throughout. It is also extremely important when we talk about cooking. So, what could we do in that respect, right? So one problem could be that there is something about awareness regarding free connections that isn't quite available. That is that some households, especially in extremely rural areas that may be less connected, may not necessarily be aware of some of the benefits that that are available to them, some of the free connections, for instance. And here we see room to work with civil society organizations. Of course, again, Dr. Prasad's warning regarding sometimes the difficulty of finding civil society organizations makes a lot of sense. But it will be one of these ways in which we can bridge that particular gap. The second thought or implication we see is that there's going to be some challenges for households, especially households that do not have a regular revenue streams, like for instance, farmers. Some of them may have defaulted and typically are not eligible for free connections. And there might be room for more leniency to help them back being connected to the grid. But more generally, if we think about this problem of unreliable revenue streams, right? If you're at the, if you're again farmer at the mercy of seasons and so forth, we need to think about more flexible payment options. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges and one of the tensions, because of course, on the one hand, many discoms are suffering financially, but on the other hand, customers, the problems faced by their customers must be taken into account. And so more flexible payment options may help on that level. And lastly, given some of the issues that many households mention in terms of flexible costs of monthly bills, this is again an area where solar power and solar home systems in particular could be helpful in terms of reducing that impact to households. There might be a higher initial cost, but in the long term, it may be easier to afford for the poor households in the state. So, more concretely, when we think about how we can, implement that, our friends from CEW have done a lot of work on thinking about different, on facilitating payment options. They have an excellent report cited here that discusses, for instance, digital payment options, which may help some of may help with bill collection. You can also think about different incentives for staff for collecting bills. And those would be ways to both facilitate the life of customers and also improve payment discipline on the side of discoms. Likewise, if we think about distributed power, information campaigns may be important, again, to access and reach very rural households and households which may not otherwise be as well informed of both the benefits of these technologies, but also of what is available and what kind of subsidies may be available to them. So this is kind of broadly said our policy implication on the electricity side. If we think about cooking, I think Diksha's report was clear, is that cost is really the big issue for households. If we think about access to LPG, right? This is what drives people's concerns about LPG. It is both a cost in terms of money, with the high cost of unsubsidized cylinders, for instance. And it is a cost of time compared to biomass, which is, again, free and often readily available. Of course, you need time for collecting it, but it may be lower than the time spent for the use of LPG. Aside of the almost self-evident idea or suggestion of reducing cost to households with, for instance, new subsidies to PMUI users, there is a second kind of approach to that, which is to think about how to increase the perceived value of this, because LPG has a lot of value. It is cleaner. There is less smoke, so it will benefit the primary cook in the household and people who spend a lot of time within the house. And these kind of benefits, we know from a number of studies, these benefits are not necessarily known by users. Right? They may not necessarily be aware of some of the damages that biomass, cooking with biomass generates. And so providing an increased sense of the benefits that are very real may also be part of a strategy to try to improve the odds of LPG. Lastly, coal dependence. Again, Dr. Prasad has kind of already talked about all these themes, but it's really a part of a bigger conversation about just transition, right? It's going to be about thinking about the energy transition as one that is fair to both people who are currently in the fossil fuel and coal industry and those who will need to find alternative livelihoods. That's been a challenge, and that's a challenge that several organizations have been tackling. One way to think about this is to think both in terms of the supply of labor, workers, and demand for workers. The need to find or to provide a real path, a realistic path to alternative livelihoods goes with addressing these two problems. Now, we know from not only from India, but from other countries that training or reskilling programs can help. They can help provide the kind of knowledge that workers need in order to find alternative livelihoods. This may work, especially given that our survey shows that cold jobs may not be that appealing to many workers, despite the fact that they offer a certain number of benefits. So this may be one way in which to move forward in terms of planting the seeds for a different type of jobs. Now, of course, these jobs have to come from somewhere, right? And so investments in these alternative livelihoods will be necessary. And there are a number of ways to fund this. I think Dr. Prasad was somewhat critical of the idea of using district mineral funds, not foundations, well, foundations, DMF resources to do so. But the money will have to, in the end, come from somewhere. And the resources that are generated from levies on coal may be the ones that are the most justifiably used in such a context. But regardless of the exact path, I think this is a problem that is being faced by not only Jharkhand, but many other regions and countries around the world. How can we ensure a just transition remains one of the big policy challenges. And I don't think that anybody has yet a clear answer on how this can be done in practice. And this is why thinking carefully about these varying strategies and thinking about how well they're doing, how well they've done in the past, and whether they meet local people's aspirations. Because that's another danger, right, is to impose an external viewpoint on what people want. And that's why throughout our reports, we recommended working closely, not only with civil society organizations, but also local authorities and organizations. With this, I think this summarizes the kind of key findings and key insights of the report. There are many more. This is a long report, which is available online. I believe Johannes put the link in the chat. So this report is now available for anybody interested. The data are also available. We uploaded them on the link provided here on the slide, which again we'll be able to share in the chat. For anybody interested, there are many more variables, data, information available there that are available for people if they are interested. Thank you very much for your attention, and I return the virtual microphone to Johannes.
Excellent. Thank you, Diksha and Michael, for walking us through the report and all the details. And as Michael was just saying, please take a look at the chat. You can download the full report there. And I will also include the link to the data in case you are interested in doing your own research using the data that we have. And now with that, I would like to open it for any questions from the audience. I think Anand has already mentioned that you can use the chat box. That is probably the easiest way to ask any questions. So if anybody has any questions to the authors about the report or anything else you'd like to share or discuss, please, now would be a good time to do that. And while we wait for the audience to type their questions, I'll use my privilege as the chair to ask the first question. And so I wanted to sort of get your thought on the sort of reasons behind the gap between tribal and other communities. So maybe Diksha, if you've been working very closely on these issues for some time, sort of what are your thoughts on why is it that the tribal communities are behind? So Diksha, if you could give your thoughts first, and then Michael, if you can share your reactions from your research.
I mean, this is very qualitative, experiential explanation for what you asked, Johannes, but I will just say that, there's two aspects to it. One, when you talk about clean cooking and the reliance on firewood, some of what we had mentioned in the past, which I mentioned during my presentation, that really firewood is cheaper. So in a way, and the fact that they live so close to the forests, those of the forests that actually remain, but the ones that live so close and in tandem with forests, this has been part of sort of an integral part of their lifestyle. And it's not just firewood, by the way. They actually have lots of different ways of cooking. Firewood is one of them, and it is the most prevalent because it is free and it's easily accessible. And so that's one, the fact that there's increased reliance on forests, but also the fact that there's a vicinity to the forest that they live in. With regard to grid access, the idea is that because of the fact that they live in sort of more secluded and remote areas, it's been harder to provide access to the grid as a result. And this is, I think Arvind might also know this more, but this has been my sort of observation from the field, that the fact that you're living, although it is true that a lot of them do now live around, the mines, big reason for this is because the forests were cleared down to make the mines. So they were living next to the forest before, but now they live very in close vicinity of the mines. And so then it just becomes an income issue. But insofar as just a unique sort of characteristic of tribal households is concerned, a lot of it does come from sort of the fact that you're living in the vicinity of forests, and that a lot of times you're living in secluded areas where providing grid access is not the most it's not the most cost effective, neither is, and so a lot of efforts has been focused on providing microgrids, as you would know. And so really that's just the more qualitative explanation.
Yeah, and
thank you, Michael. Do you want to?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I would just kind of say something that a couple of things that were striking from some of the analysis we did of the first study, so 2 years ago. In that study, we found strong evidence that scheduled tribes were at a disadvantage in terms of electricity access. That was very striking. The gap was quite large. If I remember correctly, electrification rates were about 10 percentage points lower, right? And the geographic explanation is part of the story. There's also just a general widespread poverty rates that are quite higher among scheduled tribes, right? Which is also going to bleed into higher degrees of energy poverty. So that's one thing I wanted to add. The second thing I wanted to add from that earlier study we did is the interesting fact that Saubagia was actually more likely to be used among scheduled among SE populations, which corrected some of the earlier policies like RGGVY, which tended to be sometimes not quite always able at helping those most affected, and so that we saw that at the time as a hopeful sign that the gap would be narrowed sooner rather than later.
Excellent. Thank you. Very, very, very good insights and interesting insights. So we do have a few questions now in the chat. So first of all, we have Rebanjana Chaudhry is asking about sort of more broadly, sort of what are the reasons behind the sort of failure to achieve universal electrification? So what are your thoughts on what are the key barriers to electrifying the remaining 5 to 10%?
I mean, very briefly from the report itself, it's clear that cost is a big barrier. And as he mentioned in the policy implication section, so a lot of households don't know that free connections are available. So really, there's an information gap there as well. They even under Saubhagya, which hasn't been many years since Saubhagya was launched, but even so, a lot of households don't actually know that free connections are available. And then so that's the access issue. And then once you do have the option and you know it, when you know that the quality of supply is not sort of worth the buck, where you're paying a very high proportion of your income, monthly income on paying the bills, if you do pay the bills, that is, then, you know, for them, it's much more cost efficient perhaps to keep on, or rather not even cost, just access efficient to keep on using, you know, using kerosene, for instance, for lighting. So it's really, there's a combination of cost, which is the biggest one, and you know, quality of supply, which is playing a role in not achieving universal electrification. And to this, I will add that there hasn't been enough focus on achieving electrification rates with the use of solar homes, like, you know, kind of replacing kerosene with solar home systems, which you know, which are safer to use, can give longer hours of electricity supply, all of the things that Arvind had mentioned. So there hasn't been enough focus on you know, sources, sustainable, cleaner sources other than the grid as well, which, you know, which also is one of the reasons.
Michael, anything you would like to add, or?
No, I was already thinking about the next question, which is a very challenging one.
Yes. Yes. So the next one is in fact directed to you. So we have a very good question here and a challenging one from Satyam Abhishek, who's asking about the fact that renewable energy investments in India are mostly in the western and southern states, in Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, while states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, where the coal is, these are the ones that are struggling with economic development and job creation. So if we talk about coal dependence and energy transition, how do you see this this sort of issue of trying to find these livelihoods, create these opportunities when a lot of the development, the renewable energy development is right now in the West and South, and you still have these huge states, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, tens of millions of people in each trying to make ends meet.
Yeah, and this energy transition problem mimics in many ways many of the other economic growth problems that many countries have faced historically, right? With the added problem or the added complication, which is that if your growth has been relying on, say, for instance, coal, it creates a dependence that is hard to overcome. You have these tax revenues that are, that fund infrastructures. This industry itself is important for local economy and so forth. And that adds a layer of difficulty because you cannot just go from, try to hop from one model to the other. It's hard to overcome the old model, right? And we know from, the experience, again, from other countries like the Soviet Union, where you had these company towns, these industry towns, which were very much about one industry, and then this industry declined, and then it was a struggle to move forward, right? And so I think the challenge is really it's a major one. If I had a short answer to this, of course, everything would be very easy and wouldn't be even here to meet. What I would say, though, is that I think we must think beyond just clean energy jobs. I think you mentioned renewable in your questions. As an alternative livelihood, right? It's not going to be, I don't think, and there are several studies that have shown that, including by people like Sandeep Pai, who has also been very much working on this topic, that it's not going to be all green jobs that will replace and provide better livelihoods instead of coal jobs. I think you need to think in terms of a wider set of potential new industries, new types of sectors that could move in. Because if you just think about going from coal to green, that's going to be a challenge, because the numbers are not going to add up. The number of people we need, or the number of these jobs, are not going to be sufficient. And so that kind of, to me, suggests more of a kind of throw everything and see what sticks kind of strategy, in terms of thinking broadly about planting the seeds. I think I used the term already before, of a number of different industries that could potentially fit both the skills available that people have and their aspirations, and then see what survives, because it's not it's hard to plan ahead to know what is going to be the one type of job that is going to be successful in such a setting. So I think thinking broadly and trying and experimenting across different type of new sectors is probably the better way to go in order to overcome this dependence.
Excellent, thank you. Great answers. The next question is going back to the issue of affordability. So Arpo Mukherjee is noting that Jharkhand has among the lowest costs of electricity in India, but still it's not affordable to the population. So Diksha, do you have any comment on this issue?
Yeah, because it's important to keep in mind that, like, you know, it's also one of the poorest states in India. And you know, we mentioned a survey in the report which was conducted after the pandemic of 11 states, which found that actually in Jharkhand, the job losses were the highest because it has such a high proportion of seasonal migrants and, you know, lack of regular salaried jobs. So you have low job security and you have job losses, you have reduced income. You know, so all of this in tandem really means that even though, you know, it might be sort of lower rates, and Saubhagya has done a lot of work in connecting people in the state, but still it's also one of the poorest states in India. And you know, given its coal dependence, as we talk of just transition, it's also likely going to be the most effective. So it's just that perspective it's important to have as we think about the barriers to cost in a state like Jharkhand.
Excellent, thank you. So next question is again from Arpo Mukherjee. This one is on sort of Jharkhand has high density of thermal power plants, and the question is on the trade in Jharkhand with other states on electricity. This one is actually, I'm wondering if Dr. Prasad would have any thoughts on this because our report did not go to that level of, so Dr. Prasad, any thoughts on kind of Jharkhand's exports and imports of electricity?
Well, I think that also combining the question just before this idea of the cheaper electricity in Jharkhand may not necessarily be true for two reasons. Because the cheap electricity generally comes from hydro, because the cost of generation is very low. Also, in terms of thermal power station, for quite some time, there was freight equalization, which essentially means that even if the coal was in, say, Jharkhand or in Dhanbad, the cost of coal was same whether you are located in Dhanbad or whether you're located in Amritsar, because the freight was getting equalized. From the time this freight equalization was removed a few years back, some new power plants have come, but now again, there's some kind of embargo on creating new power plants based on coal. So Jharkhand may not take great advantage of that. So right now, I don't think Jharkhand is importing a lot of power. Some power is being imported on exchange from the power plants which came, private power plants which came more recently. Otherwise, for the distribution companies like JBVNL and all that. But nevertheless, the quality of or cost basically comes to the consumer because of bad quality of performance of distribution licenses. Because the cost gets added both in terms of quality of power and also inefficiency in working of the DISCOM is passed on as a cost to the consumer.
Excellent. That's good insight, and it is important to remember that the role of hydro in kind of driving these electricity costs, because the variable cost is almost zero. So keeping these natural resources in mind is always valuable. We still have quite a few questions, so let's keep going. And if I could request. Let's keep the answers fairly short so that we are sure to get through all of them. So next question is, this I'm going to direct to Michael, is from Rajneesh Anand, who is asking, how will Jharkhand be affected if proper planning is not done for just transition? So can you sort of give some thoughts on what might happen if we have no strategy?
Right. Well, I mean, the danger is a situation where there are abrupt changes, right? So I think, for instance, several coal mines closing down. These are the situations that are harder to manage when you suddenly have a lot of people who are looking for new jobs at the same time, especially if it takes time to provide new jobs, right? If you have to reconstruct different industries or different sectors, that takes time. And so you may be facing situations where you are suddenly struggling to find alternative livelihoods for people. And I think that's where kind of thinking a bit ahead and planning is going to be important. And it's important because the government or state authorities have also a role to play in terms of thinking about coordinating, these new sectors, or helping those who are already there grow, right? That's going to be a situation where you will want to have some planning. Because otherwise that's going to, the struggle is going to be a situation where you have suddenly thousands of people who have to find new jobs at the same time. And we know, again, from the experiences made elsewhere, that these are situations that are a challenge from a policy standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So the next one I'll ask Diksha. I know you've spoken to some of the government officials about these issues. So Mohua Mukherjee has a very interesting question that both in the Saubhagya and in the Ujjwala scheme, we have the situation where there's a lot of emphasis on the initial connection, so electricity connection or LPG connection, and much less emphasis then on sort of what happens after that, kind of like the monthly use of electricity and the delivery and affordability of LPG. And so she notes that sort of one way to think about this is that the central government is responsible for the initial connection for that scheme, and then the state government kind of takes over on the ongoing operation. So have you heard any kind of thoughts on this from the Jharkhand state government officials? Is this kind of a common view, or any reactions to this?
No, I'm actually not sure, Johannes, if this is true, because I don't know who subsidizes the cost. I think that the cost for refills under LPG refills under PMUI, it's you can actually get the second refill. Like the first one in some cases is free, and the second one you can actually get it at a more subsidized rates, and the government offers a rebate to the oil marketing companies. This is my understanding, and I think that's the central government that offers the rebate under PMUI. So I actually wouldn't know if this is the case, that it's the state government's responsibility to ensure. Assuming that ongoing use means refills, I still think that it still comes under the mandate of the or perhaps there's a cost sharing agreement there, but I'm not sure if this is the case or not. Like perhaps Dr. Prasad would know more, but I'm sorry, I actually don't know if this is the case. From my understanding, it was the central government.
Dr. Prasad, any reactions?
No, I'll just add to that. This is true not only with Ujjwala or other scheme. It is almost true with any government-sponsored scheme, that when the scheme is formulated, you will have initial capital investment, but ongoing running cost or maintenance cost, which requires regular funding, you may not have. And the idea is that those who get used to it will fund it. So as Diksha was saying, for quite some time, even for the high-income group, the LPG was subsidized through direct subsidy to the gas marketing company. So suppose the cost is 1,000 rupees, and if I buy one gas, I'll pay 1,000 rupees, but 400 rupees will come to my account. So subsidy was passed on. So the same thing is Ujjwala, whatever subsidy is being given, it is being given by the government of India itself. Initially, it is given, but as you can see, as the number of users increases, any subsidy amount is a huge draw on the revenue of the government. And at some point or the other issues takes priority, and this gets diluted. So ultimately, user is left to use the connection or gas with a little bit of subsidy here and there, but by and large, by his own income. And that is why you find it affordability issue keep on coming for the group of people who are handling.
So one thing I'll add here, I think, Diksha, you made an interesting point here, is that there is some difference between electricity and LPG, because electricity is a concurrent subject where the distribution is kind of primarily controlled by the state government, whereas LPG is under oil and gas, where the primary responsibility is with the central government. But we do have some state government schemes on refills as well, and Jharkhand was actually one of the states that had introduced a refill scheme at the state level. So there's kind of like dual authority in a sense in some of this. Moho is also asking Dr. Prasad if you could just kind of reiterate your thought on why the District Mineral Foundation might not be the best way to finance some of this just transition. Could you just briefly repeat that?
Yeah. So,
and I can also add.
Okay, Diksha wants to add, so should I go ahead?
No, I can go after you if you wanna. I just wanted to add perspective.
So, District Mineral Foundation gets a certain percentage of royalty of major minerals. It could be coal, it could be iron ore, or whatever. It is also governed under a scheme called Prime Minister Khanij Kshetriya Vikas Yojana. And that scheme lays down the policy, guideline, schemes which can be taken. Most often, theoretically, it can be used. But practically, most often it is used for such essential items like drinking water, because as you can appreciate in mining areas, drinking water is not locally available. Whatever it is available, it is highly polluted. So it has to be brought out from a distance, stored, processed, and supplied. So the fund is used for that. Second, it is also used for some healthcare because of huge pollution due to dust, smoke, and all that. It is also used for maintaining roads because movement of heavy trucks requires frequent repairs. So right now, I checked with some of the district collectors in the state are the chairman of this District Mining Foundation trusts. And then you have all the MLAs. It has to be approved by the Gram Panchayat or Gram Sabha. So the area development, these kind of projects somehow takes the priority and consumes most of the fund. And it will be very difficult to convince that cut on the drinking water and spend on skill development. But there are other skill development programs of the government of India there, but quite often the challenge is not so much about the skill alone, but finding employment once you acquire the skill. That becomes an ongoing challenge, not only in Jharkhand, but I would say in other states as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Diksha, did you want to add any?
Yeah, I want to add on this, basically, like, what Arvind mentioned, that under the Pradhan Mantri Khanji Kshetra Kalyan Yojana is what DMF is administered. And this scheme actually within its text lays high priority areas where 60% of the DMF funds are supposed to be used, amongst which are sanitation, health, there's also environmental pollution, education, and skill development is actually there in those high priority areas. And then there's 40% which are used for other priority areas. And what I was curious about when I was researching on DMF 2 years ago was why aren't, a lot of districts using, even though it's under the skill development is under the high priority areas, most of them were using it for sanitation, for infrastructure development. And it makes sense because if you look at the governance structure of the DMF, the district collector is sort of the head of the chair of, so it's a district-based structure, and the local village level government have a lot of say in this. And a lot of times they are the ones that want a road. So they're like, we want a road. We want, sort of more schools, and they want sort of more visible projects. And this is one of the reasons that so much of DMFT funds are actually used for these, because they want a water tank. And so the more visible projects really get a lot of limelight through DMFTs. This is one. The other was that, when it comes to skill, we shouldn't just be looking at alternative livelihoods as just skill development. It's also the infrastructure development. You give them a cold storage. There's a lot of forest, in Jharkhand, there's scope for a lot of forest products to be like supply chains to be set up for mahua, for instance. And there's sericulture that goes on. There's so many alternative livelihood options. There's self-help groups that women have, their micro enterprises that could be funded. So it's not just skill development that we are talking about with DMFT. We're also talking about an integrated approach to sort of alternative, which is not very easy when you just think of a district level where the governance of DMFT lies. And, I think last year in March, there was a huge uproar when Odisha started to use its DMFT funds to build a hockey stadium. And they used really 266 crores to fund a hockey stadium with the DMFT funds. And Odisha is one of the states with one of the highest sort of accruals in DMFT. So it's not that it's true, what Arvind is saying, that there's competing priorities for DMFT use, and a lot of districts are using it for a lot of good reasons. Especially, you need clean water, you need sanitation, all of that is great, but there needs to be sort of a more integrated thinking, not just in terms of skill development, but also infrastructure development for alternative livelihoods and supporting micro enterprises, which we do think that DMFT has the scope to do if it's planned well. It's all about planning, and that planning has to be done along with Gram Sabhas, along with the MLAs, and along with district collectors. And this integrated approach is sort of a harder sell in a way, but it's very important for a just transition.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time here, and we still have quite a few questions. So let me see if I can address some of these directly and sort of as briefly as possible. So first of all, we have our longtime collaborator Nitin Rathore is asking about the role of the bureaucracy in some of the challenges that the Ujjwala scheme has faced. And I think the answer to that question is that the primary responsibility for the distribution of LPG cylinders is with the oil companies and the oil distribution companies. But of course, the bureaucracy is responsible for these schemes and the overall management. So there is kind of multiple different agencies that play a role, and they all take some, like a share of the challenges. At the same time, it has been a very difficult time with COVID-19 and everything. So it's not entirely clear that anybody would have been able to kind of address these issues very well. We have Ashwini Ashok from SEED, who is asking about how Jharkhand could help the state's climate development goals while providing adequate power supply. And I think the opportunity there is the use of kind of distributed energy resources for household electricity, productive uses. For example, you could think of sort of some manufacturing, kind of food processing activities to create more value, and maybe minor forest produce, forestry kinds of activities could create some opportunities. Dhiraj Gupta is asking if we looked at any issues for tribal communities when it comes to land acquisition, deforestation, environmental justice. My understanding is that in Jharkhand, there's very little land acquisition for renewables because it's actually, to a significant extent, because of these tribal land issues, it's very hard to build large-scale renewables in a place like Jharkhand. But when it comes to coal mining, these issues have certainly been kind of issues. We haven't looked at them specifically, but we think they are a very important issue to look at. And then we have Prashant Svain is asking about sort of if we took any feedback from shareholders, stakeholders about the situation with rural electrification and the local distribution companies. We have discussed these issues with them, and I think there is a kind of a number of interventions on the technical side, like sort of more targeted analysis of the data, sort of real-time monitoring of supply quality at the local level. But a lot of work remains to be done to make this real. And I know that Professor Samdarshi has been had some extensive discussions with the distribution company JPVNL on making these interventions real. But with that, very short answers because we did have a lot of questions in the end. I do want to move forward with our program to make sure we get through everything. This is very important. So what we would like to do next is we would like to move to the panel discussion, and to do that I would next invite our colleague from Power from All to take the lead. So we have Anand Patanjali here to moderate the discussion with our guests and with any questions from the audience. Anand has over 8 years of experience in assisting local and national governments in helping with formulating better policies on energy. He has worked in India and Africa, and he's currently based in South Africa and works as a program manager for Power for All. So Anand, please start the panel discussion.
Thanks, Johannes. Thanks, Michael and Diksha and Dr. Arvindji for the wonderful first session. Now I would like to invite like two eminent faces in Jharkhand. I mean, like everybody knows them in the energy sector, but an introduction is always due to where it's needed. First, I would like to invite Professor Sanoy Kumar Samdarshi ji. He's a professor in the Department of Energy Engineering and coordinator for the Center of Excellence at Central University of Jharkhand. He's well known. I mean, he's a very well known academician and very well versed in the policy and the research side of energy and efficiency in Jharkhand. Next, I would like to invite Vijay Shankar Bharadwaj. He's a well known professional in the field of energy and energy access. Everybody might know him from his days in UNDP, where he brought in the changes working with the Jharkhand government on transitioning Jharkhand from a coal-focused to a more solar-focused, policy-centric state. He has been key in working with the government there. Little background on him is he's an environmental engineer from Delhi University. He has worked in the renewable energy space for more than 13 years. Currently, he's working with WRI as a consultant. Previously, he has worked with Dalaika Energy, Deloitte, Semgrop, UNDP, and played a very critical role in the state action plan for climate change in Jharkhand. Now I would like to invite Professor Samdarshi, your views on this report, and from your expertise and field of work, where do you see this report fits into the current framework of Jharkhand with the government, with the proactive government, with the proactive bureaucrats? How are we seeing this transition? How are we going to bridge these gaps? From your over to you.
Thank you very much, Anand. So, is it audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for making me a part of this, and also for bringing out a very good report. So, report I saw very carefully, and I saw that many things are very revealing. Although what I saw is that pre-COVID 2019 report and then COVID report during COVID, whatever happened. So 2021 report, which just now it is being released. Probably the next thing in progression would be that there should be something post-COVID also, because whatever you are getting is probably not the right reflection of the trajectory which it is going to take. So that is one first comment I would like to make. I'm very happy about the report because I'm a solar person. So what I see is that solar home light use has increased from 3% to 5%. So being solar person, I am happy about that. But another thing I'm not very happy about is that cooking, because cooking is one of my areas of interest. Solar cooking is another thing. And where I find is that LPG has not been that successful. Firewood, still there are issues along with that. And of course, solar cooker, which I'm trying to promote in my own way, is not picking up. Solar cooker has a big potential. Only thing, I don't know, government is not taking initiative, or we are not pushing sufficient enough. So to start with now, electricity and billing, I have my own views on that. For example, billing is now being outsourced by JVBNL. If we consider JVBNL as an example, it is being outsourced. And the persons who have been given this contract, how much work they are doing, what is the output of that, probably that has to be properly monitored. So that is one thing which should have been done. Second is that in this whole thing, survey, one probably important point would have been to also consider the availability of mobile phones with the population. Mobile phones, because many of these facilities, for example, LPG, if you talk about, LPG, if somebody has to order, for example, when we do it online, and then it comes, it is delivered to us. But if people don't have this kind of connectivity, they have to go there and bring it. It is much easier for them to cut something from around their homes and then use it whenever it is needed, and whenever they find time, they again go to towards the location where LPG is available, and then they bring it. So that may be one of the reasons. So that should have been done. Now, next thing is billing, etc. As I mentioned, these are the issues which I wanted to tell here. And then lighting, kerosene. Of course, kerosene, I don't know why it has increased. It doesn't give a good picture why it has increased while solar is already there and Saubhagya is there. So because of that, now electricity access has should have increased, but it is still there. Now, so I think solar has to be promoted as Dr. Arvind Prasad, he also mentioned, solar has to be promoted in a big way. I had one experience about 12 years back of Assam. I went to one village, and what I saw was that they had very good home lighting system. And those villages, let me tell you, those are more inaccessible and untraceable also. Reason is that gets flooded, and then people shift from one place to another. Now, in that case, when you have to trace who is there, that is a very difficult thing. But even those people, even under flood condition, they were using solar-based system, and of course, mobile as well. That is from where, and there are no roads. You have to walk on foot to reach those places. So that I'm talking about Assam experience. So similar kind of situation is here also. For example, availability of the grid. I attended a few meetings, and there it was told that even installation of solar becomes a difficult thing, because going to those places and then installing is an issue there. Another thing is regarding coal and just transition, and of course vocational training. If we are very serious about just transition, we have to start vocational training of the people who will be displaced from there, or who need reskilling. So that kind of thing has to be done. And in fact, our university, Central University, has taken some initiative in this direction, because government has several funding schemes for that. And one of my colleagues has been given charge. We have got some funding. We have started working on that. So of course, I'm not in charge. I'm in charge of another thing, and that is related to training of teachers in energy related area. Teachers and students who will be going to different villages, and they'll be basically training people how to use renewable energy resources. So that is one thing which has been done, and I have been our project has been selected from DST, for which I have to present on 22nd. So that is one important thing which I wanted to share with you. And of course, I must thank Johannes, because we have been working together for quite some time. Unfortunately, it was all during COVID period that we could not proceed or we could not perform the way we would have liked. But then it was a great experience working with him. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chandraji. Vijay, over to you.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks for inviting me in this webinar. So briefly, I would speak on three or four subjects. First is the reliability. There is no doubt that grid outreach has increased tremendously in last 4 and 5 years. When UNDP team started working with JEREDA and JVVNL very closely, and we remember that at that time we were searching for few villages which were not having the electricity at that time, and with the help of few microgrid and mini grid installers, we were able to identify approximately 50 villages at that time. I mean, the search was not extensive, but yes. But when after 2 years of start of the Saubhagya, we were exploring to do some pilot in those villages in different business model, and we were hardly able to locate 5 or 6 villages out of those 50 villages where grid has not reached. So out of 50, 45 villages we are having at least wire and transformer. I'm not saying that reliability was not there or not, or connection was not there in the home or not. But yes, grid was there. But fortunately, we identified 1 or 2 villages in a very deep forest area, and we were able to demonstrate some, good innovative model and presented it to JAREDA. And in fact, that was one of the starting point when JAREDA and REC also started, exploring that instead of bringing a main grid to these remote areas, how we can, supply power to these villages, installing mini and microgrid. And in fact, I don't know how many of us or in audience knows that Jharkhand has installed maximum number of mini grid in the country, that is 250. That has been installed by JAREDA only. And apart from that, there are several other players like, Mlinda, Hamara Grid, Gram Urja, Pradhan, Tata Trust, Sini, Felco. There are n number of organizations who have supported many mini grids that is there in the Jharkhand. So yes, I mean, some numbers here and there, reports are very much relevant. There might be some sort of deviation and here and there 1 or 2 or 4%. But yes, a report is almost very relevant and true about the numbers, I would say, based on my experience on, extensively working in rural areas, in urban areas, with institutions, with industry, with livelihood, institutions, with forest, with, JVBNL, with JUSCO, with SAIL, and other agencies. So one part is definitely that grid outreach has improved tremendously. Second comes to the reliability. Yes, reliability is still a problem. I mean, a few interesting personal story I would like to tell you that when we were conducting this, survey in remote villages, then many villages had asked for the number, sir, do you have number? Because sometimes they thought that they are representing, they are from a government agency or representing JVBNL or JAREDA or any utility. So they still keep calling me that, sir, हमारे यहाँ आज बिजली नहीं है और पिछले 2 दिन से बिजली नहीं है. So yes, reliability is still a problem. But what is the solution of this problem? Do Jharkhand have, lack of supply or lack of generation plants? As one of the audience was mentioning, that Jharkhand is not having the dearth of supply. There is power available. The reason that I have found out is that the very much central nature of JVBNL. If you will see other states, consider Odisha, consider Bihar, consider Gujarat, consider Karnataka, consider Tamil Nadu, any state. Every state have at least 4 and 5 discom. So my first suggestion is that instead of having central distribution utility, just debundle it. Make JVBNL a holding company and establish 3 SPV. One is for Santal Pargana, one is for Chota Nagpur, and third is for Kolhan region and Palamu. It will improve the efficiency. It will improve every part of the efficiency. Either it is technical loss or either it is commercial loss. In my view, and I mean, you people can also have the view, and many people can have the view that how it will be covered. But in my view, Jharkhand should also have 3 discoms. And every discom should be headed by a senior IS official or senior administrative official under the holding company of JVBNL. This is going to bring a lot of efficiency in the system, in my view. Because fortunately, during my previous assignment or in previous companies, I have worked in many states, in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, in Maharashtra. So I saw that different SPVs are able to manage that particular zone very efficiently. So I had one opportunity to present in one of the public hearings where at that time Arvind sir was heading the JCRC, and I saw very limited presentation of the rural people, like Mukhya, head of the Gram Panchayat or industry. Only there were a few people who were just defending the either tariff rationalization or reliability part or supply part. So in that way, you can in that sense, the public hearing nature is still very centralized in Jharkhand. Whenever we do the public hearing, only in Ranchi. We do not do this public hearing in different zones where civil societies from a different zone can participate, and they can also present their problem, and a senior IAS officer or senior administrative officer can hear the problem and add the presidency. So that is the one thing. Second is definitely seeing the undulating topography of Jharkhand. Distributed solar is going to play a very vital role in future. And it can be very, very good solutions to bring the reliability in among the tribal community and in the remote area. But again, not the grid connected. You need to have customized solution for those areas that should have a very robust battery bank, at least for powering the base load, like lighting systems and maybe 1 or 2 cooling fan. Unfortunately, neither MNRE nor a state have any policy or any incentive for that system. So whatever incentive and subsidies available, that is available for grid connected system, and that is not going to work in those rural areas, because once the grid will not be there, your system will not work. And the problem is different here. Problem is not to offset the electricity bill. Problem is that to bring the reliability in the system. So you need a different kind of solution for that. Unfortunately, there is no subsidy for that. And no policy for that. So either state government or central government must frame a policy. I would say a state government to give some sort of incentive or some sort of some sort of subsidy, and define a benchmark kind of a customized system and cost. That is number 2. Now, if we come to the kerosene versus solar, if you are going to make a true business sense, it doesn't make sense. So when we were installing a 17 kilowatt off-grid system in Chatra district, in Kunda block, one of the remotest village I have seen ever, because this is my second stint in Jharkhand. As a student, I have also spent 4 years in Jharkhand, one of the remotest part of Jharkhand, one of the beautiful place in Jharkhand, Netherhat, where we used to face the similar problem. But somehow this distributed solar system were helping us at that time, 20 years back. So definitely, when we asked them that we are going to install a grid in your village, will you pay? So once we will install, you will have to pay. How much you will pay? They said, someone said 250, someone said 100, someone said I will not pay because government is giving you money. You are installing the system for free. Why will need to pay? So we started making the case around kerosene. When we asked that how much kerosene you burn on a monthly basis, they said that 2 to 3 liters. What is the cost of that? 150 or 100. We said that you should pay 100 rupees. The entire village agreed in one go. But the cost that is involved in installing the 17 kilowatt hybrid system, including 40 kilowatt hour of battery, it cost approximately 30 lakhs. I'm not going to recover, in the entire money in my whole life. So there should be some alternative mechanism to, install such kind of systems, which will bring, reliable power into the, in basically those tribal area. One model is VGF model, like, whatever Jareda, whatever installed or whatever systems has been installed in Jareda, that was by, 100% of upfront funding. We had suggested that go for the alternative model. Give it to an investor and ask them, you have to supply the power at this rate, and after that, after fixing that tariff, what is the VGF required to make this case viable, make this case attractive from your perspective? But unfortunately, that was not accepted by the government at that time, because the objective was to solarize or bring the power as quickly as possible to those villages. But this I see a very very innovative solutions to bring the reliability in the remote area. Third is yes, cooking part. Although I have not studied much on the cooking part, but yes, as Diksha and many other speakers said that the barrier is that one is the higher cost, definitely, and second is, as Diksha mentioned very correctly, that behavioral change. that many, villagers basically accumulate the entire, fuel for the, use of the throughout the year, and they hardly, move to, source the LPG, even if they have the money. So one is the free availability of the, forest wood, and second is definitely cost, and third is behavioral change. But what is the solution? So the first solution I see is that first, try to switch them from mud-based chulha to the smokeless chulha. So efficient cook stove. In fact, we were also working with the forest department, and there is a adaptation program funded by NABARD is also going in the two locality. One is Jamtara and one is in Ramgarh area. And we had made the provision for distribution of the 8,000 numbers of the clean cook stove, efficient clean cook stove in those areas after conducting a baseline survey. So this will definitely reduce the stress on the forest, and this will also reduce the consumption of the coal in those areas. I mean, the number that is needed is very huge. Again, we can, as Diksha said, that we can also channelize the DMF-15 for such interventions in those areas, particularly in those areas where density of the mining is very high, particularly Ramgarh, Burkunda, Giddi, or any other area. Apart from coal, coming to the transition part. So I think just transition is very, it will be a havoc for the state, I would say, because state, most of the revenue that a state source is from the, revenue or tax component of the coal export from the state to other state and to other central plant. So what is the substitute for that? That is a very big question. So Jharkhand don't need just transition. Jharkhand need orderly transition. And we need to think that what are the substitute that is going to bring the revenue to the states and to the people, instead of, if the, coal export from the state will, go down. So also, although, I mean, I would say it might be, looks very ambitious, but why not make Jharkhand, hub of the, manufacturing for the renewable component? We have steel, we have coal, we have aluminum, we have copper. What is not there in Jharkhand? Why not we can manufacture the wind turbine? Why not we can manufacture, if Tata is there, why not they can manufacture? I mean, Tata is there, Vedanta is there, Hindalco is there, Shell is there. If any other company can manufacture the wind turbine blade or wind turbine pipe or gears or whatever, why not Tata or why not Vedanta or why not other big companies in Jharkhand can manufacture that? If solar structure can come from Gujarat to Jharkhand, why not solar structure can go from here to Gujarat? Unfortunately, the installation of the utility scale solar power plant in Jharkhand is very difficult. Apart from solar, you don't have other resources, very limited other renewable resources, like wind is not there. Biomass, the status of the agriculture here, the monocropping is pervasive. After paddy, if we'll go into the Jharkhand, deeper in Jharkhand, we'll hardly see the second crop in 10 or 15% of the area. So one very, very, very typical use of DMF is to bring the improve the irrigation coverage in the state, in particularly in those mining area, in collaboration with some other agencies like either JSLPS for the time it's doing a great job. It was started by UNDP, and then JICA fund came in, and then World Bank fund came in, and some matching fund were there from the state government and central government, and I think JSLPS is doing a tremendous job to provide the livelihood opportunity to n numbers of people. Why not DMFT fund can be converged or can be channelized for such interventions along with the JSLPS or some other similar livelihood interventions with some other state agency, like suppose JTDA. JTDA have also done a fantastic job with the help of IFAD. So these are the opportunities that I see can bridge the gap when Jharkhand will move from the pure coal economy to low carbon pathway. Again, one audience asked a very valid question, that whenever fundings come, it mostly goes to the western state or to the central state. If you will see the funding that has come from the World Bank for rooftop solar installation, either from ADB for rooftop solar installation, either from KfW for mini grid and microgrid installation, or from EIB or for any European agency or any other donor and agency, most of the funding is going to those states which are more active in this space. So what I think, there is a need to establish a state-specific clean fund, like what India had constituted NCF, like National Clean Energy Fund. Similar to that, there is a need to establish clean energy fund at least for 3 and 4 states: Jharkhand, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, and other states which is having the highest amount of coal reserve, and there most of the revenue come from the export of the coal.
I think we have lost Vijay. Let's
active to source the global funding, either from the World Bank or either from the ADB, or I mean Odisha is one of the dearest states for the World Bank and IFC. If Odisha can do that, why not Jharkhand can do that? If you will see the GCF funding, there is no GCF funding for a state. We have solid institutions there, ISEP, Saundarsi sir is there, Excelra is there, IIM is there, BIT Misra is there, NIT Jamshedpur is there. Why not we can conceptualize a GCF funding proposal for the state? So I mean, in the different avenue, different solutions, not ready to any particular market fit solutions. But yes, my opinion, or in my view, 4 things are very critical. One is that decentralize the JVVNL, make 3 SPV. Second, try to source the global funding. Third is that try to make Jharkhand a manufacturing hub for the solar and other renewable components. You have each and every resources. Consider that you have one of the finest aluminum manufacturer in India, across the Asia, Hindalco. Why not Hindalco or any other agency can manufacture the frame for the entire country, for solar manufacturing, the frame for the solar PV plate. We can do that. So I mean the policy level interventions.
I think we have lost Vijay again for a few seconds now. Saundarshi, I just want to ask you a question, since you have been working for a long time in the sector with the governments and with a lot of researchers. What has been, I mean, if you see the previous report and this report, like the journey in the last 4 to 5 years, for a state like Jharkhand, what has changed in terms of awareness among the public, as well as with the bureaucrats and the policymakers? Do you see there has been a positive shift towards understanding the barriers and the findings that have been presented in this report? Saundarshi, you are paused. You're muted, sorry.
I think people now probably know, the bureaucrats, the policymakers, they know what is the direction which has to be taken. And this has been possible because of organizations like you who have brought forward these kind of data, which is a very convincing data and which is guiding them. Now the thing is that government has to act, and I was looking at one of the questions that everything is there, but then some actions are lacking. Who will act? that is up to now the government. Our thing is just to give advice and then some technical suggestions which are to be given and which we are doing, to the extent possible. So whenever we are told to do something, we certainly deliver. But the thing is that government has to be more proactive in doing all these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandershi. Sorry, Vijay, we just lost you on the last part. But I think very, very insightful conversation.
Sorry, Anand. Sorry, there was some connectivity problem. So sorry.
No problem at all.
This is what from my side.
Great. So one thing I wanted to ask you was, so when you said that, like all the fundings that are working, I'm with grantors and international organizations working in different other states and not in Jharkhand. Do you think it's because that Jharkhand doesn't have a clear vision, be it on energy transition or be it on the outlook for solar targets or mini grid targets? Has state not created an appetite for the funders to invest in the state?
Anand, yes, I mean, up to some extent, yes, but not completely true. Every state wants to bring funding in the state. Who don't love money. So yes, I mean, there are some, I think during the last government, a lot of funding came in to the state in different segments, like, World Bank have funded their, strengthening of the strengthening of the transmission line. And that is definitely going to help a state to bring the reliability again. I mean, the work is going on, but again, I would say that the centralized nature is creating a problem because, the topography is very difficult in Jharkhand. So suppose you have to draw at 33 kV or higher, transmission line, you will have to take the n number of permission from panchayat, from forest, from different body. So, I mean, decentralized kind of generation is very much, a solution for Jharkhand. And yes, because just, government changes during this, transition period and pandemic started. So that might be a reason that, government is not approaching different funding agency for at least such kind of infrastructure strengthening. Their prime, objective at this moment is to, sustain their people and, feed their, BPL people. And so the objective is different, particularly for last 2 years. And going forward, definitely I see, because somehow I'm also involved in, refining the state level action plan on climate change. So some sort of discussion is going on with the APCCF Campa, who has asked me to prepare a PPT for that, and also propose some sort of discussion on the different secretary, that what is the funding required for the, bringing some climate resilient infrastructure in different segments. That is, energy is very much there, rural development is there, water department is there, urban department is there, mining is there, livelihood is there, transportation is there. So total there are 10 segments for which this climate action plan has been revised, and the state is thinking to allocate separate funding for different segments. So I think, yes, I mean, during that interaction, I would definitely say or request APCCF Campa to present this to government, to approach multilateral agencies or donors to bring some sort of dedicated finance for the strengthening of the rural infrastructure, particularly related to electricity, particularly below the 11 kV line, and particularly for developing the decentralized solar system in those blocks and area which are still struggling to get the reliable electricity.
Thanks, Vijay. So we have one question in the chat box. So before going to that, let me just ask Sandershi one more question. Sandershi ji, we are in the pandemic right now. So how do you see the outlook post-pandemic in the recovery phase, especially for solar and for energy access and reliability as well? What kind of a trajectory will Jharkhand take down the line, say in a year or two from now? if we are going to look back at this webinar 2 years from now, where do you think our position would be in?
See, I'm very optimistic about everything. The only thing is now probably next pandemic or next something doesn't come. So that is one thing. Another thing is that it will take initially, I think it will take some time because for last 2 years, probably everything is at standstill. So things are moving, but they are not moving that fast. So what I see is that it will be much faster than what it has been, because in the report also it is very clearly visible, because there are changes which are very marginal, either on this side or on that side. They are not very visible changes, or as it is mentioned in the report again and again, statistically significant changes are very less in all, if we see everything. So what I see is that there will be changes in everything. Reason is that now everybody is suffering. Now they will start moving. So job creation and government will certainly start. Even for example, I am in education. Everybody is thinking about now. Let us start doing. Otherwise, see, everything is going to be. People are comfortable just sitting and doing not what they should have done. So, for example, in our case, our labs we are not able to perform experiments. So that is one thing where we really lack. Same thing, similar kind of situation is everywhere. I keep on visiting places. Sometimes I meet people, and what I see is that they are looking forward to for this phase to be over, and then they'll start working. So I'm very optimistic about what in every sector, every sector related to energy, solar energy. And I'm very thankful, highly thankful to Mr. Vijay Shankar ji. He's also a solar enthusiast, it appears, and the kind of suggestions which he has given. In fact, whenever I go somewhere, I talk exactly on these lines. For example, he was talking about different renewables, and solar he highlighted. Of course, solar is the best option, best bet, if we say, for Jharkhand. Reason is very simple, very simple. Jharkhand is having so many clear days, so solar is very much there. Jharkhand is relatively clean, so dust-related issues are not there. Temperature, average temperature is low. Solar is the best. So that is one. That is from the application side. So this means that we should install as many solar power plants as possible. Whether it is a microgrid or whether it is attached to grid, we are also going forward in this direction. Our university is going to install a large power plant now. So I hope now things will move, because I have been working, pushing our university for last 1 or 2 years. Of course, we'll go under RESCO plan, not under CAPEX. All right. So RESCO for government institution, it is considered to be much better bet than private institutions, because we don't have any earning motive. So in our case, it is just to make ourselves more comfortable in terms of availability of energy. So that is the thing. Another very good suggestion which Mr. Vijay Shankar ji gave, and I think I am for this, and that is we should go for industries for solar, whether it is solar thermal or whether it is solar photovoltaics. So we have to differentiate between these two. Solar thermal will need, let us say, there also aluminium will be needed, more will be copper, need of copper. And we are having copper here. So that can be used. So those industries can use. And on the other hand, if we go for solar photovoltaics, the cell manufacturing needs clear environment. We are having everything here. All right. So that is there. We should, I think government has to take initiative, or maybe some private players. Private players will not come unless we are having a very good law and order situation. No? So law and order is another thing, which everything comes with that. If you are telling something, when I saw some data, I saw Khunti, I saw Latehar in terms of tribal availability of the facilities to the tribals. I could easily guess that there are certain regions behind that, which are not exactly means initiatives being not taken. All right, so there are certain other things which are the reasons. So law and order, if it is there, I think things will move very fast. Jharkhand has everything, as Mr. Vijay Shankar said. Thank you very much.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks for ending that on a very positive note. Vijayji, for you, the question on the chat box is on mini grids. So I hope you had a look at it. Any response on that?
Definitely, I mean, it makes business sense, basically. And apart from, excluding me, there are many agencies which are basically advocating for that, like SEED is the flag bearer in the state on policy front. And they have already submitted the draft version of the policy. It's all depends upon the government that when they will adopt it and what would be the implementation mode, who will own the mini grid, what would be the tariff structuring, will it be feeding kind of tariff, where investor will come and will manage the asset at some cost, and they will get the tariff to recover their capital as well as getting a decent return. So policies there, draft policy has been submitted to JREDA, and I would say there must be, there should be a collective effort from all stakeholders, including your organization or Professor Saundarsi sir. Arvind sir has been a part of JCRC. I would say he should play a very active role in that. I think his kind of knowledge and experience he has, that is definitely going to play a vital role to convince government that this will make business sense for them. This will bring reliability in the system. Just adapt it. Maybe some changes or tweak is required in the policy, but policy is very structured policy, and I would say state government should adapt it. And going forward, I would see that definitely they will adapt it, because until unless they will adapt it, in my perspective, there 250 numbers of grids are going to be dysfunctional very quickly. Otherwise, there are no other options to maintain those grids.
No, very well said. I mean, like I remember last year, myself, Ashwini, yourself, and Samarchi ji, we were all present during that SEED's mini grid policy submission to JREDA. It was last February 2021, if I'm not mistaken. We are almost 1 year. Okay, we have a reason of pandemic, but that can't be the only reason to prolong it. I mean, that policy was already 2 years old. So I think it's time that we also push the government to make sure that the policy comes out so that it makes a business case for the state and attracts more investments as well.
I think, Anand, what is basically holding this is that, I mean, up to some extent, we are pushing to this thing to JREDA, and JVBN is also involved there. So I think somehow we should make a collective effort to present this, draft to the Energy Secretary, or maybe reach to JCRC sir, that sir, look, policy has been drafted 2 years back, and also all stakeholders have given their opinion, and their opinion and comment has been addressed by different agencies or policymaker, and very much by JREDA. So now a state should adopt it, and this is going to benefit in big way. So I think we should present it to the right person now to get it adopted.
Sounds like a plan. I hope all the attendees and panelists will take a collective effort on this. Definitely, I'll be involved as well. Johannes, over to you from a global perspective. What do you think of the discussion, and to your closing remarks as well?
Well, thank you. Thank you to the panelists for your insightful remarks. That was a kind of a broad and interesting discussion. Just a few thoughts on some of what I thought were some interesting key points. First of all, I think this idea of trying to develop some manufacturing and industrial capacity around renewables is a very interesting idea. I think it's something, the kind of innovative thinking that is needed, and I would certainly encourage all the stakeholders in Jharkhand, government, private sector, civil society, explore this opportunity, because I think it sounds quite promising, and it would address some of the kind of livelihood and diversification concerns that we have seen. So that's one point that I found particularly interesting and insightful here. The other point that I want to highlight is I think it's also on the renewable energy demand side. It's interesting to think about what are the right strategies for a state like Jharkhand. And again, considering that most of the action right now is in like we saw in one of the audience questions, is in the south and the west. So is there a way to use strategies like rooftop solar, distributed energy to really move forward with the renewable energy as one engine? At the same time, I do want to go back to sort of Michael's earlier point and really just note the fact that it is unlikely that there would be kind of enough employment and job creation just in the renewable energy sector, because we have to remember that Jharkhand's dependent on coal. It's not just the mining, it's really all the industrial capacity around it. And so that would also then raise the question, to what extent can the universities like CUJ kind of keep exploring these, so we say kind of low carbon or zero carbon industrial processes, which might become necessary again in 5 to 10 years if the demand shifts so that there is less demand for traditional steel, aluminum, and all that. So those seem to be some areas that I find quite interesting here. Finally, just in terms of closing remarks, I want to note that I think it's really interesting how we see in all of these discussions, we see this kind of like tension. On the one hand, it does make sense to focus on certain areas, right? That you have a report on energy access, or you have a report on coal and everything. But if we listen to the discussion, we also see that there's a lot of connections between these different areas, right? So just to give you a few examples. So clean energy is certainly one strategy for energy access. And as we heard, for example, from Professor Samdarshi, we have this sort of interesting increase in the use of solar lighting in the rural community. So is this something that can be expanded? Would that work with some of the tribal communities? We cannot really disentangle these two issues like we used to do in the traditional times when these were like two completely different verticals. Similarly, if we look at the diversification and livelihoods and all that, to what extent can we use clean energy to drive, for example, value add processing of harvest or produce? Can we do the same thing with minor forest produce? What about some sustainable forestry initiatives? These things are again going to be linked to each other. So I would suggest that maybe the strategy forward for those of us who are more on the research and analytical side is to do these kind of specific studies of specific areas and study them as kind of deeply as possible, but at the same time also have convenings like this that bring together the different areas so that we can explore the linkages and opportunities there. And certainly we here at ISEP, we hope that we can continue being part of this discussion, which will be led by the local researchers, the local civil society groups, and of course the local government and private sector as well. So we are here to offer any support that you might need. Please keep in touch with us. Please continue to engage. And I do hope that this pandemic situation improves enough that we will be able to come and visit Ranchi again. It has been far too long. I think the last time we have visited was around the last report, so which was launched right before the pandemic. And since then, unfortunately, we have not had a chance to visit. Thank you. And I think with that, we can conclude the webinar. I'll give everybody 15 minutes of their time back and look forward to seeing you at the next engagement.